Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, Chair. I trust that you are hearing me and seeing me okay. So, thank you, Dev. Thank you, Chair, and esteemed keynote speakers for establishing the essential background for this morning's panel. You know, roughly 68% of the world population constitutes internet users. Remarkable considering that the world literacy rate is estimated at around 87%. And we are painfully aware of the many dimensions of digital exclusion that is a vexing barrier to many more. But far beyond the internet's use as an increasingly primary channel for human communications of all sorts and forms, the internet is the foundation for much of the critical infrastructure on which all countries and the world rely. Internet resilience, that is, the ability of a network to maintain an acceptable level of service in the event of an outage or during crisis, is therefore of keen interest to every person on the planet. This session explores internet resilience with particular attention to the implications for Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. Its scope covers some, though by no means all, multidimensional imperatives to create a stronger, more resilient internet for Trinidad and Tobago's shared sustainable future. Along with the events of the Caribbean Association of National Telecommunications Operators, CANTO's events this year, and the Network Resilience Workshop hosted by CaribNOG later this year, at both of which events you will hear from the operators. This session takes a larger reach. Today we have with us 6 presenters from varying agencies across the ecosystem of the internet. We will start with Kevin. Kevin is the Director of Internet Development at the Internet Society, ISOC. We will then go to Kurleigh, who is the Executive Officer, Technology and Engineering at Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. Brent McIntosh represents CaribNOG. Patrick Hosein, the University of the West Indies. Rodney Taylor, the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. And Bevil Wooding, ARIN. So we'll take them one at a time, and we'll start with Kevin, who represents the Internet Society as Director of Internet Development. Kevin?
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim, and good morning, everyone. As you've heard, my name is Kevin Chege. I work for Internet Society. I'm going to give a quick presentation on a project that we worked on in Africa called Measuring Internet Resilience in Africa, or as we call it, MIRA in short. So ISOC and AFRINIC is our regional internet registry in Africa. We decided to work together to find out exactly what the internet experience in Africa was. And to do that, we came up with a project called Measuring Internet Resilience, or MIRA in short. And as we were going about thinking about how to actually carry out the measurements, we found out that it was best to come up with a rounded score that we could use to compare the internet experience in different countries, because we came up with several metrics, several measurements that we wanted to carry out, but we wanted a representative figure that we could use to say, this is the internet experience in this country. We came up with what we call the Internet Resilience Index, or IRI, as we call it in short, and it is a rounded score that represents the internet resilience of a country. The IRI score is derived from 4 key pillars. This is, you see them on screen: infrastructure, performance, enabling technologies, and local market. And within those, we have several metrics that we considered as important within that specific pillar, which I'm going to go through briefly next. So I won't go into the actual thinking about that, but we did do a white paper that sort of captures our thinking and approach for how we came up with all these metrics and all these numbers. And my next slide will show you how we calculate the actual rounded score with these 4 key pillars. So each pillar represents 25% of the rounded score. And then, as I mentioned, within each pillar, we have certain dimensions. So, for example, if you look at infrastructure, these are the physical infrastructure that you need to have a real internet connection. So we're talking about submarine cables for countries that have undersea capacity, or in the case for a landlocked country, for example, we have terrestrial cables, mobile connectivity. Under performance, we look at how the internet service providers in that country actually performing in terms of to the home and also mobile speeds. The third pillar there is enabling technologies. We look at the DNS ecosystem. We look at routing hygiene. Routing hygiene here meaning how well are the ISPs in that country exchanging traffic within each other, because that forms the key local fabric for exchanging internet messages on within the country. And then finally, we look at the local market ecosystem. How competitive is a market? Because our view was that a more competitive market means that for an internet user in that country, you get better pricing and also better performance and better choice. So if you don't have good service from one provider, you can go to another provider who gives you better uptime and therefore better resiliency. So we came up with this rounded score, and we aggregated data from several sources. We didn't really do all the measurements ourselves. We came up with the weighting that you see here. And the key thing that is important to note with this index is that it is modular. Modular meaning we can add more pillars if we want, or we can add more dimensions within each pillar. So for example, if under infrastructure, let's say we need to add a new dimension, maybe presence of low Earth orbits, we can low Earth orbit satellites, we can also do that. So to visualize all the data that we gathered, we came up with a visualization dashboard. We call it Pulse. Pulse, we visualize various measurements, one of which is resilience, but we also have other data on there like shutdowns and emerging technologies. So these are some of the visualizations you can see related to internet resilience of a country. So you can see the score of a country, of one particular country. So this is an example here of Namibia, the rounded scores they get under the four key pillars that I've mentioned. You can also see an average score for a region. So the big map of Africa on the right, you see a score for Southern Africa. And then you can also delve in a bit more into a specific country and see a graph of the actual scores there. So as we were doing this work, we also developed a prototype measurement system that we could use to carry out active measurements. So the data you've just seen in the previous slide, those are from various sources, as I mentioned, from Ookla and so on, that we just aggregate together. But we also wanted the option of carrying out our own measurements. So we tested out a prototype active measurement platform. We used Raspberry Pi 4s. So these are small form factor computers, very small devices that can be just run from, they're low power devices that can be run from any part of the network. And the way we run them is that we deploy them in various countries and install certain software that would allow us to orchestrate them or to manage them. So for example, if we need to install a certain software application or we need to update them, we're able to do that. We use a tool called Balena, which is free for a certain number of devices. And we were able to do that with about 10 countries and about 25 devices in total. So the average cost of the Raspberry Pi is about $120 with some costs there for logistics, sending the device to the host who's going to host the device. Most of the devices right now are in home networks, and we are carrying out two main measurements. Right now we're doing RIPE measurements. So these are what you'd call your Atlas probes, Atlas measurements, which are very similar to what you get from an Atlas probe. These carry out DNS-related measurements. And then we have the MLab client, which carries out throughput tests. So how fast is a link? So if you're paying for, say, for example, 10 megabits per second, are you actually getting that 10 megabits per second at the home? So those are the average costs that we have. Software is not really a cost here because you can also use Open Balena, which is free, and you can orchestrate the devices yourself. It's not as friendly as the paid version, but you can still get a lot of work done, which is what we're using right now. The diagram on the right there is our thinking of how we carry out the measurements. So we have a storage for all the data collection, and then the actual devices that are carrying out the measurements that send that data for storage and eventual visualization. So finally, I'd like to close with some insights. We've been running this project now for about 1.5 years. here are some sort of key insights or takeaways for those who'd like to carry out their own measurements, or be interested in carrying out measuring the resilience in the Caribbean region, for example. Metrics vary per region. So the metrics that you see on Pulse right now are specific what we felt were important for Africa. We've had several discussions with people outside Africa, and they felt you should add this or remove this. So that's what I was saying. The index is modular. Partners can help get work done much, much faster. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's why we've worked with several partners to get not only the thinking behind the index, but also the actual calculations. And then a measurement platform, as I've just demonstrated, the prototype that you've seen there, it's, I would say, very simple to establish. It's just a client on one side of the network carrying out a measurement to another side of the network. But it is expensive to maintain because you have to manage staff costs, storage of data over time. So not really expensive, but there are sort of hidden costs that come up as you move along that you need to consider. And then finally, the audience is very broad. We've had a lot of interest from governments who want to derive framework guidelines, individuals who just want to know how good is the internet, and also from journalists and inter-service providers who just want to know how good the connection is. So I'd like to close there because of time. I'll be online for more questions of this session, and I'll share these links on the chat. Thank you very much. Back to you, Dr. Kim.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Your introduction and the mention of the 4 pillars: infrastructure, performance, enabling technologies and security, local ecosystem, and market readiness. Very, very important, and an excellent segue into our next speaker's contribution. Kurleigh Prescod, as I mentioned, is the Executive Officer, Technology and Engineering at the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. Before Kurleigh comes in, I'd like to just call everybody's attention to a study by Rife, the Rife Labs, Kevin and Kurleigh, in which they identified a number of factors that contributed to the surprising resilience of the internet in Ukraine, despite, of course, extremely difficult circumstances. Among other things, these included low market concentration at multiple levels and the relatively high number of interconnect facilities. And these 2 issues are mentioned in several of the upcoming contributions in this morning's panel. In particular, to start with, I hand you over to Kurleigh Prescod, who's going to chat with us a little bit about the regulator's role in internet resilience. He's going to do so from the point of view of the country case of Trinidad and Tobago. Kurleigh?
Hi, good morning all. It's my pleasure and honor to be here representing the Telecom Authority and, of course, my country, Trinidad and Tobago, to present and share our role, or the role that we perceive we have in relation to internet resilience, in terms of ensuring internet resilience. I do have one challenge. My screen sharing is disabled. So I don't know if the panel could either enable my screen sharing or can put up my presentation for me.
I think it seems to be okay. Try it out, Kurleigh.
Okay, I'm getting it now. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm just awaiting confirmation that you all are seeing my screen.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, so yes, so it's our pleasure to sort of share how we perceive we can support and facilitate the very noble and necessary principle of achieving internet resilience within Trinidad and Tobago. So we start first with the legal mandate, which empowers and enables the authority to engage and support efforts in relation to establishing and ensuring and maximizing internet resilience. So there are sections in the Act which speaks to us facilitating the orderly development of a telecommunications system in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as promoting the public interest as it relates to the quality of services. And we also have sections in relation to establishing standards and ensuring this is systematic development of telecoms in Trinidad and Tobago. So in that regard, we have that legal requirement to step in and ensure that the internet and networks in general are as resilient as possible. We then move to the actual authorizations we issue to our operators. The instrument that is issued in Trinidad and Tobago is referred to as a concession. So the concessions that we issue to our operators that authorize them to provide services have specific sections as it relates to quality of service, service interruptions, and there are schedules in that concession which speaks to their quality of service requirements, particularly as it relates to internet service delivery and provision of internet access. Yeah. And then finally, we look into the supporting instruments. So we have the Act, the principal legislation, the authorizations, the concessions, and then we have the supporting artifacts, which are issued pursuant to the Principal Act, the Telecommunications Act. So therefore, we develop and we draft regulations. So at this time, we have a draft consumer quality of service regulations, which speaks to the service levels which internet providers are to deliver to their customers. And the Act, as I mentioned above, talks about us establishing standards. So we are also continually developing our standards for wired and wireless networks and broadcasting and other network technical quality of service. So then we move into the actual standards that we've established, that we work on, that we build. So we have standard measures that we develop around user experience, things like download speeds, upload speeds, latency, which we are familiar with. And we attach those to the relevant international standards, which inform how these things are measured, or how they are defined and how they are measured. And then we look at network performance standards. In other words, those things we expect the network to be able to achieve to support a resilient internet and a quality user experience. And again, we have the accompanying standards where available. And these standards and these parameters effectively are our way of quantitatively measuring, right, the extent on which networks and the internet here in Trinidad and Tobago are resilient. So basically, this is how we measure, how we're able to track and ensure that our providers provide and maintain an acceptable level of service during an outage or crisis, as defined by our moderator. So there we look at different ways in which we support internet and network resilience in Trinidad and Tobago. So as we mentioned earlier, we looked at establishing and monitoring of standards. Another way we support is the licensing of sustainable competition. So ensuring that we bring sustainable competitive efforts. And Kevin talked about this, that one of the ways of measuring, one of the ways of ensuring resilience is having competition. So this is a role that we as a regulator play. We look at regulatory collaboration, how we work with other regulators and enabling agencies to ensure that the networks and the internet delivered in Trinidad is resilient. And we look at diversity of critical infrastructure. And we'll dive into these a little more as we move on. So as we look at establishing and monitoring of standards, here we have the technical standards, which we as the authority have worked on, consulted with the industry, and have developed and passed. So as you can see, we have technical standards surrounding the performance and resilience of these networks for fixed and wireless networks. And then we have the tools which we use to monitor these standards that we establish. And we tackle from two angles. One angle is through using crowdsourcing tools, which is collecting all of that data that users generate when they do speed tests and so on, to give us data from users in relating to coverage and performance. And then we're also looking at developing probes, similar to what Kevin spoke to, which will be installed on connections to actually perform actual measurements on specific internet connections. We then look at the licensing of sustainable competition. And in this regard here, to ensure that mobile providers and wireless providers can deliver quality service, we ensure we allocate and assign optimal spectrum to support those services. We are also enabling and facilitating the entry of low Earth orbit satellite systems, which will again provide an additional layer of resilience in the sector here. And from an over-the-top framework perspective, we know there's this proliferation of over-the-top services in Trinidad and Tobago. And the authority has embarked upon a consultation to ensure that while these services are available, we could ensure that they're not at the expense of the network operators here in the market. So we're looking to get a proper balanced approach to ensure the continued sustainability, both of the over-the-top providers as well as the underlying network operators. And then I spoke about regulatory collaborations. One of the things we do, and some of my speakers will talk on a little later, we collaborated with the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management in development of their National Emergency Communications Plan, which has a number of requirements, such as submitting business continuity plans and what operators are required to do in the event of an emergency, as well as we engage with various infrastructure agencies to see how we can work on shared projects to, put infrastructure underground and make the networks more resilient to things like natural disasters like hurricanes. And then lastly, a big thing, promoting diversity of critical infrastructure. Kevin touched on this as well. So one of the things we've always, as the authority, have been keen to do is to authorize multiple international and now inter-island cable systems to ensure that there's redundancy and connectivity between Trinidad and Tobago. Another initiative we're keen on is diversification of landing stations and paths. In other words, right now, we have about 3 or 4 cable systems all terminating the same landing point in Trinidad. We're now working actively with operators and various supporting agencies to establish a separate landing point with separate subsea paths out of Trinidad and Tobago. We've embarked upon our consultation on the net neutrality framework, which will ensure that there's fair and balanced competition, across the various services that are delivered on the internet and on internet networks. And finally, we support and encourage and continue to accommodate the proliferation of internet exchange points. Here in Trinidad, we are fortunate to have 2 IXPs within the main island of Trinidad, and discussions have begun on possibly establishing a 3rd IXP in our sister island of Tobago. And I raise that point. As I raise that point, I hand over to my next panel member, Brent, who will speak further on the critical nature that IXPs play in internet resilience. And with that, that brings us to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kurleigh. Yeah, so you see, Kurleigh, I'm very happy that you covered several of the dimensions of the regulator's role: establishment and monitoring of standards, diversity of the critical infrastructure, licensing of sustainable competition, 5G regulatory collaboration. These remind us that the resilience of the internet is not limited to the resilience only of the physical infrastructure, but it is the entire ecosystem, not only of actors, infrastructure, services, but very much so the enabling environment. Regulators' role is very important. Thank you also for segueing into IXPs. We have a wonderful presentation from Brent McIntosh. Brent is the Chief Technical Officer at McNet-Solutions. Today he's representing the Caribbean Network Operators Group, CaribNOG, and I hand over to you, Brent.
Well, listen, good morning to all, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here today talking about internet exchange points. I just want to mention, as a key stakeholder of the CaribNOG, the Network Operators Group, the Caribbean Network Operators Group, and a partner to the Internet Society, internet exchange points play a very, very critical role in being a part of your local network ecosystem. So let me just share my screen and we'll talk a little bit about internet exchange points. So what is an internet exchange point? Well, an internet exchange point is a physical infrastructure that allows logical connectivity, or what we call pairing, to very important services. For example, what we call critical infrastructure, DNS, global content delivery networks, local content networks, and the entire role of these systems interconnected together is to provide you resilient connectivity. It provides you the option to have what we call, reducing your average per bit delivery cost, which is something that benefits internet service providers. But are internet service providers the only one who benefits? Not really, right? Today, I'll show you and demonstrate how other entities, for example, the financial sector, governments, even large enterprise customers, how they benefit from connecting on what we call an internet exchange point fabric. So here I have a network infrastructure diagram of a real life internet exchange point that was deployed sort of mid last year. This is the internet exchange point of Suriname. And you might ask, well, Suriname, why didn't you use Trinidad and Tobago? Well, I wanted to, but Suriname has a few secrets that I want to sort of speak about today. Suriname and Trinidad are pretty similar in terms of population and internet service providers. And if you take a close look at this network infrastructure diagram, it represents redundant physical interconnectivity, redundant network services for critical infrastructure, for example, DNS services, network time services, root servers, TTLD servers. And this infrastructure is meant to serve as a resilient connectivity platform for our IXP members, our internet service providers, our financial sectors, our learning networks, our education networks, to promote hosting and connectivity of global CDNs. The whole idea is to ensure such an infrastructure can act as I look at it as a backup heart should your primary heart fail. And IXPs today are no longer like the traditional IXPs of the past. They are meant to be a critical component of your existing local and network infrastructures. And the way in which these support, your network infrastructure in your local country is that you have anycast systems, anycast services, for example, and I will show you in the next slide, the traffic that end users are interested in will always be served closer to them, will always be served from the internet exchange points. And that's very important. Reason being, end user quality of experience, and as Kurleigh mentioned, quality of service is very, very important. And even in Kevin's presentation, IXPs can be a point of where these measurements can actually be done from. So you can see how well a country is performing in terms of how it accesses services from its local ISPs. So this slide here, and this was meant especially for the folks who think IXPs are not really important. This slide actually highlights its importance in promoting resilience for any island, a country that wants to build and continue to grow its digital economy. So if you look a little closer here, you see I have a couple entities connected on a redundant IXP fabric, which are normally switches that provides these physical connectivity at different speeds, from 1 gig up to 100 gig. On a normal working day, when everything is fine, there are no complaints, traffic that's available on an internet exchange, for example, maybe Akamai, Google Cloudflare, Facebook, DNS root services, NTP services, will always be used in preference to that same traffic available on the internet. Why? Because it's deployed in what we call an anycast manner, meaning traffic that is closer to the end users will be served from that location. And this is exactly what happened. So normal traffic flow for traffic available on the or content available on the internet exchange fabric would be served to the local end users or customers or consumers of these service providers. Now, say we have an outage, for example, ISP1 would have lose connectivity to the internet. Maybe there is a subsea fiber failure, or maybe there's an outage that's affecting them, a outage further upstream that's affecting them. Then this IXP promotes resilience by allowing the possibility to have temporary commercial arrangements for maybe ISP2 to assist that ISP1 in actually transiting the traffic through the IXP fabric to the internet. So this is how IXPs can also assist, when there are major failures in one's country. And that's why, we look at IXPs as a very key component to resilience. We have seen in the past where only internet service providers connect to an internet exchange. That is no longer true. That is no longer the best case scenario. We want everyone to connect. I'm going to give you a couple examples in terms of resilience. We have seen two major outages from, I think, 2019 to 2021, where a particular ISP lost connectivity. Now, and that's in the case of Grenada. We saw that the internet exchange point that was hosting multiple global content delivery networks were hosting, I think, at that time, maybe 15 to 16 local websites. We saw that traffic was still being served locally, to that ISP's customers. And that's great news. Now, one might say, well, the internet exchange would not be able to serve all that content. And that's true. But the more you grow and develop that resilient infrastructure, then it becomes possible to start serving more content than you did the year before. And that's why internet exchange points needs to be part of your planning and development as a country. I also want to highlight that we have seen two new trends, and which is the government of Grenada connecting to the local exchange. And the government of Grenada is now the third largest consumer of content on that internet exchange point. We have seen one financial institution, which is a major bank, they decided for their resilience planning and their disaster recovery planning that they are going to connect to the exchange. And the question was, why? What is going to be the benefit? You're a bank. How is the IXP going to help you? Well, they said, we are hosting all our front-end services with a particular global CDN. And that global CDN happens to be on your IXP, which means in the case of an outage, my web services will still be available and possibility exists that we're probably going to be the only financial institution that is operational. And it's actually a very good competitive advantage for us. So we're seeing just like major internet exchange points around the world, we're seeing benefits of connecting to such infrastructures. I just want to give a quick highlight of quality of service benefits and also serving of content and reason why we should try to grow internet exchange points as major facilitators of local content. So these two slides, the first one here was the Grenada elections. Of course, in Grenada, there was a change of government after tons of years. And the moment the results were announced, we took a snapshot of the traffic. Grenada saw its peak traffic at that time, which means that the communication at that point would have been excellent. That means there would have been less constraints and pressure on ISPs of serving content that was meant to go upstream. That content about the elections would have been served locally. And that was a plus, right? That means end users would have had an excellent experience and were able to share content much faster than they would have before. One of the most exciting matches in the last World Cup held between, I think it was a semifinal between Holland and Argentina. This was a state in Suriname. Suriname average peak traffic is around 400 megs. They actually hit close to 700 megs during the penalty kickoffs, right? And again, it just goes to show that in terms of resilience, you have the ability to access and share content over a local infrastructure with a much better quality than you would have if you were doing it upstream. Upstream, I mean, through the internet and back. One of my favorite slides here, reason being to promote, resilience on a whole, you need to make your internet exchange point very attractive. How am I going to attract the top guys, right? The top CDNs? How am I going to attract Meta, Facebook, Google, just name them because there are tons of CDNs out there. Well, there is this lovely little website called ParentDB where internet service providers, internet exchange points, and other entities hosting their ASN and their IP resources can register. Once you register on ParentDB, and in the case of Suriname, You can see all your pairs, connected parties, what speeds you're connected at, and basically the key components of what makes your internet exchange points a great one for me to connect to. Case in point, let's take, for example, let's say I'm Google and I've just invited Google to connect on the IXP in Trinidad. Well, Google will take a look at your parent DB, database and say, well, yeah, Trinidad has tons of potential. We're going to connect with you. The whole idea of this is to ensure that you market yourself so that you can attract multiple participants to connect to your exchange, to grow your exchange. The more you grow your exchange, the more services you can actually provide locally. We took a snapshot of, well, as time moves on from year to year to look at the growth of autonomous system numbers in the Caribbean. In the case of the English-speaking Caribbean, we see that there are quite a bit autonomous system numbers, and the autonomous system numbers is a number that's required if you want to pair on an internet exchange point and connect using a particular protocol that's required, right? A protocol that's called Border Gateway Protocol. Now, we see in the smaller islands, we have quite a bit of ASNs as well, if compared to some larger countries. And as you can see, there's a growth of internet exchange points in these islands, which means that there is the drive to build resilience in the Caribbean. So this is good, right? Because if I give you a piece of data, and again, I'll draw reference to Grenada because I'm very close to Grenada. In 10 years, Grenada was able to grow its serving traffic from 15 to 6 gigs. The expectation this year, at the end of the year, is to grow to around 10 gigs. Why? Because the idea is to continue to encourage membership of the internet exchange points so that more critical services can be shared locally. So the ISP can act as a critical component to your resilience plan, not just from a business perspective, but nationally as well. We encourage all other countries to do so. I'm pretty happy to hear that Trinidad may deploy a third IXP, because IXPs are not meant to be, oh, we have one and we only have one. IXPs are meant to be part of your resilience plan, and as much as you can bring content and critical services closer to your end users in maybe small geographic pockets of a single country, then that's the key goal. So really good stuff on that there, Kurleigh. Just to end, I just want to say a few things quickly in terms of moving forward with your resilience plan. You need to promote more hosting of local content, build more drives to ensuring that local content can actually be served from your local network infrastructure and also your local internet exchanges. The idea is to continue to partner with more CDNs, and they do not have to be global CDNs. Could be a Caribbean CDN. I know they're very smart technical groups that are working on their own services, maybe in Trinidad or St. Vincent or St. Kitts. What about hosting their content on your IXP? I know Caribbean is actually working on some great projects as well. And even in our IXP directory, you can see what's happening around the world in terms of Caribbean IXP growth. And we will probably share a link with you in this chat here so you can actually see what's happening with Caribbean IXPs. Increase. What do we want to increase? And this one is very important for me. And this is where the difference is made. Increasing your stakeholder groups and your membership base. Find the people that would make these things happen, all right? Because every aspect of developing a infrastructure and a digital economy needs sort of resilience in every facet, whether it be security, physical infrastructure, connectivity. Resilience is the key. But you can only get these great ideas from your stakeholder base and members who can help drive these actions. So I always recommend that you look at the key stakeholders for making things like this happen. Thank you very much. I'm really happy to continue this discussion offline. I'll share my contact details. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Brent. And the message is clear. Redundancy for resilience. Redundancy across devices, redundancy across connectivity, pairing to critical infrastructure, Very grateful to hear of regional examples also, Brent. Many thanks. You know, a recurring theme across all three contributions to date is monitoring and analysis of data. We have heard these stories from the point of view of very different actors in the ecosystem: ISOC, telecoms regulator, IXPs. Very interesting. Another recurring theme is collaboration, collaboration for resilience. We have heard of many different types and forms of collaboration. You know, one of the things we will take from your presentation, Brent, is IXPs as the backup hearts, backups for the eventuality when your primary heart fails. Now we're going to pick up from there and look at a potential issue with DNS resilience, particularly in the case of SIDS, Small Island Developing States, and a complementary DNS mapping strategy and platform for added resilience. Complementary, that is to say, complementary to the standard traditional scope and reach of the IXPs. So Patrick Hosein is the director of Trinidad and Tobago Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group, TTMAG. He's also a professor of computer science at the University of the West Indies. We're very pleased that Patrick will be contributing to today's panel. However, he is traveling at this moment, so has provided his lightning presentation in the form of a recording, but will join us to the extent that his connectivity will allow for the question and answer in due course. So Denise, if you can take it away with Patrick's presentation.
Hi, good morning. My name is Patrick Hosein. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of the West Indies. And I will be talking about one potential issue with DNS resilience, in particular for small island development states. Let me thank IGF-TT for inviting me to give this presentation. So before I get into DNS resilience, let me just, for those of you not familiar with DNS, let me give you a quick, highly simplified overview of DNS. So machines on the internet actually communicate via numbers, just like the phone system. You make calls to phone numbers, but humans prefer names. So, if you want to go to a UE website, you prefer to put in st.ue.edu rather than the actual corresponding number. The domain name system, DNS, was developed to do this mapping automatically between unique names and addresses, IP addresses, or these numbers I talk about. This function is performed collaboratively by multiple machines over the internet. So it's a hierarchical structure that uses multiple servers. All right. So let's talk about the problem itself. Suppose you want to connect to the UE website. You start a connection to sta.ue.edu on your browser. And assume your laptop is in Trinidad. The request goes to multiple servers to do this mapping. So your browser would send out this resolution request, and it will go to multiple servers. Some of them are outside of TNT to map this name to this IP address. And then once the number is returned, the laptop then could make that connection through our local IXP. And so the routing would be intra-island routing. So there's no need to go to the outside. Now, suppose that TNT becomes isolated from the internet. Well, the mapping function may not be possible because you no longer have access to the outside. However, intra-island routing still exists because of the IXP. So one possible solution, of course, is to map or to maintain a cache of all mappings But this is not practical, and this is why the DNS was developed to simplify this process and make it more efficient. So one proposal is to maintain a cache, but only of mappings that point to machines within TNT. All right, so we know the IP addresses that belong to machines within TNT. These are typically provided by ISPs, so they know which ones are local. Also, the ISPs can determine most of the local mapping requests because those mapping requests go through machines controlled by the ISP. Some they call it a name server. Now, not all requests go through ISP name servers because some customers may actually be using non-ISP name servers. But the ISPs could look at that information and any destination to a local machine, that mapping could be saved or stored. And then, of course, it will periodically flush old mappings because things change over time. In terms of deployment, it's relatively straightforward on a periodic basis. Some script will be run to extract these mappings from the ISP name servers. They would be stored and old ones would be expunged. And then if Trinidad becomes isolated, then we could use this stored cache to do this mapping, this lookup. Of course, if multiple ISPs do this, then they may want to exchange data because they would have different mappings. We did some analysis of this type of approach. So if you look at a case where you expunge after 6 weeks and we have a one-day isolation event, first note two things. Sites that are rarely accessed may not be captured during the 6 weeks, but then again, they are unlikely to be visited during the one-day event. Sites that are frequently visited will be cached over that 6 week period and hence be available. So when you actually work on the probability as you're making certain assumptions, etc., the probability of not being able to find a mapping for a particular local website or local destination is less than 1%. All right, so the solution does not require significant overhead. The operation is automated. The resources required are limited. Remember, the process will be done offline, so it doesn't affect real-time functions. It may not capture certain sites that are rarely visited, and these might be sites that are important during a disaster, but these could be manually entered into that cache, that saved cache, and kept permanently. Actually, we, a couple of years ago, we developed a site to do precisely that. People would be able to go to that site and enter information about their mapping. But of course, if we do nothing, then we will feel the effects later on, where if this isolation happens, which is possible, if we have limited access to the outside. So for those of you who would like to find out more about this particular problem and the proposed solution, you could have a look at this journal paper on internet resilience in small island states. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the talks.
Thanks as always to Patrick. Patrick is a pioneer of many hats in the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago. It is important that there is in place a number of mechanisms to provide primary, secondary, and even tertiary level mechanisms for resilience. That Patrick has discussed an example of very simple, low resource solution. And many others are possible. We encourage the adoption of strategies like this to diversify and to supplement traditional mechanisms for resilience. And happy to discuss that more. Patrick will be online for the question and answer. Remember that maintaining a cache of all mappings that point to a particular, or point to machines in a particular country is one of the low resource solutions to get around some of the limitations. So what we have, the journey we have taken so far, starting at sort of definitional background level established by ISOC, and moving from Kevin to Kurleigh, showing us many aspects of the regulator's role in resilience that extend way beyond the traditional technical matters of infrastructure, but all of the different dimensions of the enabling environment. Then we took a deep dive with Brent into the IXP's role. Remember, of course, the IXPs play a role alongside the traditional operators. You can get much more on the operator's role, both in the upcoming Canto events this year, as well as the workshop that Caribnog is putting on later with the specific theme of internet resilience. Patrick, close that module, as it were, of today's session with an example strategy, low resource strategy to supplement existing resilience mechanisms. Now let's take our focus out a bit at the regional look, recognizing the importance of regional resilience, internet resilience, to national internet resilience, and the importance of national internet resilience to Caribbean-wide internet resilience. Bringing to mind also the many references so far to the importance of collaboration. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you the Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunication Union, the one, the only, Rodney Taylor. He's going to chat a little bit today about the mechanisms to develop and operationalize a regional framework for internet resilience. His perspective comes from the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. Rodney.
Good morning. Thank you, Kim. Good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be a part of the TTIGF 2023. I hope you're hearing me well. I am Rodney Taylor. As mentioned, I am the Secretary General of the CTU. And the CTU is a regional intergovernmental organization, a CARICOM institution, basically, that is headquartered here in Trinidad and Tobago, established since 1989. And I'm talking today, and I want to thank the other presenters who've gone before as well for the excellent presentations, very much on point and very relevant to us. And my little presentation is about the mechanisms to develop and operationalize a regional framework for internet resilience, offering a CTU perspective. And I'm happy to be able to offer that perspective from the CTU because I happen to work here. So at the moment, we have a mechanism that we call, I refer to it as a mechanism called the Caribbean Internet Governance Forum, very much like the TTIGF that is happening here today, but it's happening at a regional level. And it's been happening for the last 18 years. Last year, we held the 18th Caribbean Internet Governance Forum, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. Out of that process, it is a multi-stakeholder process, and out of that, we've produced an internet governance policy framework that's already being developed. It's on our website. It's been developed through consultation and collaboration with a number of regional and international stakeholders. We need now to, based in the context of this discussion, to pay particular attention to internet resilience. Of course, internet governance is the broader topic, and it is very much related to internet resilience. But internet resilience should speak to specific policies and standards as outlined in previous presentations, getting into things like IXPs and calling on standards developed, say, by the ITU, Technical Standards Bureau, IEEE, ISOC, Internet Engineering Task Force, the International Standards Organization, etc. So internet resilience, I would frame it that is a subset of internet governance. From a regional perspective, I started my timer, sorry, so I keep updating. From a regional perspective, I think this remains a very effective mechanism for harmonization, specifically on the issue of harmonization. If you're talking about a regional level, of course, every sovereign member state of CARICOM, and even outside of CARICOM within the Caribbean, has its own initiatives going on. We have been supporting implementation of IXPs, even in the French overseas territories, St. Bart's, Guadeloupe, St. Martin. But in terms of harmonization and a harmonized approach, the CIGF remains a very useful mechanism for collaboration and harmonization. There is room for improvement, specifically on the CIGF, and in particular, if we are paying greater attention to internet resilience, it needs to be more multi-stakeholder in its implementation and operationalization. And I'm suggesting, this is just a suggestion, and there's room for further discussion, I'm sure, beyond this TTIGF. Something of the sort of a Caribbean Internet Resilience Task Force, CIRTF, with a focus on policy, cybersecurity, network engineers, and consisting or made up of network engineers and operators, developers drawn from regional and international communities. So if I run out of time, this is the synopsis of what I'm saying today, and I'll get now into each of these separately. The CIGF, I mentioned, it's a regional multi-stakeholder forum initiated by the CTU and the Caribbean Community, or CARICOM, Secretariat in 2005 to coordinate a regional approach to internet governance. The initial focus was on the proceedings of the United Nations World Summit on the Information Society. Last year, we held our 18th IGF. We also had the pleasure of hosting the first Caribbean Youth IGF, organized, planned, executed by young people from within the region. And we were also very pleased to have our first Small Island Developing States Internet Governance Forum. Those recordings are available on our YouTube channel. I encourage you to visit and review some of the presentations. We had the UN Envoy for Technology giving us some feature address, and also the Minister of Science and Technology from Barbados. It is multi-stakeholder. There are governments involved, CTU members for sure, ministers, permanent secretaries, chief technical advisors, the private sector, many of the operators in the region, civil society, the technical community, the internet organizations like LACNIC, ARIN, and so on, ICANN, and of course, academia. I mentioned the policy framework has been produced, and I'll just give you some of the main areas of focus in the IG policy framework relate to infrastructure for broadband connectivity, internet technical infrastructure and operations management, the legal frameworks and enforcement, internet content development and management, public awareness and capacity building, and research. Basically research, of course, examination, measurement, and reporting on the development and usage of internet resources. And I like in particular, the first presentation, the project in Africa, and it's something I'd like to see implemented for the Caribbean countries. But for this presentation, again, the focus is on number 2, which is internet technical infrastructure and operations management. And this relates to the technical standards I mentioned, the addressing schemes, the domain management systems, critical infrastructure and administrative structures for efficient, stable, and secure internet operations. And under this second focus, the development of internet infrastructure relates to guiding the evolution, adoption, and utilization of critical infrastructure and elements, as well as the appropriate technical standards and methods for internet addressing, network security, and stability, number, resource, and domain management to promote and enhance efficient and effective internet utilization in the Caribbean. In a nutshell, internet resilience. We heard presentations on the importance of internet exchange points. I believe there's a little side debate in the chat going on about the importance of IXPs and their supporting ecosystems. Patrick proposed solution for addressing certain aspects of the ecosystem of the IXP, and TATT spoke about the regulatory frameworks. And of course, Brent gave us a technical overview of how the IXPs are deployed. So all of these aspects are related to the effective operations of the internet technical infrastructure, things like country code, top-level domains, management and operations, technical and operational standards, and of course, cybersecurity for cyber resilience. Now, I spoke about the Caribbean Internet Resilience Task Force, and this does not exist presently, and I'm suggesting it's a possible framework for operationalizing internet resilience in the Caribbean. It can provide at the operational level, similar to what we have in place right now for some time, the Spectrum Management Task Force, SMTF. And in fact, there's a meeting taking place of the Spectrum Management Task Force next month in Jamaica. And you can get more information on that from our website, ctu.int. And the CIGF meets once a year, typically around July, I believe, August. Sorry if I got that wrong. But there's a need for intersessional meetings, focusing on specific things. And I think internet resilience would be an excellent one for which this mechanism could be stood up. The forum itself, CIGF, would provide a platform for the Internet Resilience Task Force to update the CIGF stakeholders, the broader CIGF stakeholders, on the work that they're doing, Okay. It should be multi-stakeholder in its composition. So an emphasis though on technical experts, cybersecurity experts, network engineers and operators, developers drawn from a regional and international community. We have CaribNOG, for example, who's on this panel, the Caribbean Peering Internet Forum, ISOC, ISSA, that's the Internet Security Systems Association. There are many local chapters here in the region. The International Telecommunications Union, organizations like Packet Clearinghouse, ARIN, LACNIC, UWI, and others. And of course, this list is not exhaustive, but really we just need a core group that has the technical knowledge and capability to give adequate support to this issue of internet resilience in the Caribbean. It meets 4 times a year and provides support to the CIGF. From an administrative and planning point of view, the CTU is more than willing to support this initiative if it gains traction, if it gains favor with the community. We can convene the meetings, we can support the development of a strategic plan to guide the work of the CIRTF. And of course, from our own base of experts here in CTU, we can provide technical input to the task force. I'm suggesting an initial mandate of 2 or 3 years, after which we can review the effectiveness of the task force. We advance using various monitoring and evaluation mechanisms to determine if we have in fact advanced the key performance indicators with respect to internet resilience. And of course, there is the opportunity to seek funding from various organizations if we package it in the right way. I don't think we really require a lot of resources to meet. We can meet virtually, but certainly in-person meetings would be occasionally important. And, there are organizations. I see my good friend Albert Daniels is on from ICANN, and ICANN has a pool of wealth of resources that they can bring to bear on an initiative such as this. So I think that's really the essence of my presentation, and I'm very much I'm here for any questions. Thank you very much for the opportunity, TTIGF and Kim. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodney. As always, we are very excited about the Caribbean Internet Resilience Task Force, CIRTF, and of course, the continued activities of the CIGF. More on this later. Policy, cybersecurity, network engineers and operators, developers drawn from regional and international community. Yes, yes, we love this. Intersessional meetings on internet resilience. Yes, thank you very much, Caribbean Telecommunications Union. So now to close our round of lightning presentations, our dear Bevil Wooding. Bevil, like Patrick, is traveling today, so has provided his contribution by way of a recording, just so that the connectivity is not a problem, but is here to answer questions in a few moments. So Demise, if you can set up Bevil's presentation. Thank you.
Just the resilience of individual components. Hello, everyone. My name is Bevil Wooding. I'm the Director for Caribbean Affairs at the American Registry for Internet Numbers. Allow me to first thank the organizers for the opportunity to join this panel on internet resilience. I'm sure you all realize that this is a topic of critical importance to us all. I'll be looking specifically at the development and operationalization of a regional framework for internet resilience. As has already been said, and many of you know this firsthand, the internet has become an integral part of our daily lives. And for many individuals and businesses, it is now indispensable. As a platform, it drives communication, commerce, and innovation in unprecedented ways. However, as we have seen way too many times across our region, the internet is not always reliable. Connectivity challenges are common and outages happen. And when they do, the consequences can range from personally irritating to economically catastrophic. Yet, as much as consumers and corporate users have come to rely on the internet, they're often clueless as to what needs to be done to ensure its resilience. Why? Well, because the internet is complex. It involves what many consider to be a mystifying, almost magical mix of technology, protocols, service providers, regulations, and laws to keep it operational. And that's why our interactions today are so very important. And that is why when we talk about internet resilience, we also need to talk about it from an ecosystem perspective. An ecosystem perspective simply means looking at the entire system of networks, devices, services, and stakeholders responsible for the effective operation of the internet. It means considering not just the resilience of individual components, but also the resilience of the system as a whole. One of the key mechanisms for achieving internet resilience is development of a regional framework. The internet is a global system, but the way it is used, managed, and regulated can and does vary significantly from one locale to another. A regional framework provides a mechanism to develop policies, procedures, and standards tailored to the specific needs of a region. In our case, the Caribbean. One of the key benefits of a regional framework over a local framework is that it enables collaboration and coordination amongst different countries and stakeholders. A regional framework can allow for the sharing of information, best practices, and resources among countries. Now, this can lead to more efficient and effective approaches to internet governance. And importantly to our discussion today, this can also lead to a more resilient internet ecosystem. Another benefit of a regional framework is that it can allow for better responses to cross-border incidents, such as natural disasters or cyber attacks. A regional framework can facilitate rapid and coordinated responses and recovery efforts across countries. This can significantly reduce the impact of an incident locally, as well as reduce the impact on our interconnected economies and societies. I think this is important for us to consider. In today's internet-connected world, and consistent with ongoing efforts at regional integration, Many of our organizations and businesses operate across national borders. A regional framework allows these entities to have a more predictable and a more consistent environment to operate in. This in turn can help them to achieve the kind of effectiveness and efficiency that we've long spoken of and long desired. So how do we operationalize this framework for internet resilience? Well, let's start with who should be involved. A regional framework for internet resilience should be developed in collaboration with all stakeholders. This includes government, industry, and civil society, and of course, our friends at academia. The multi-stakeholder interaction that we are part of today is an excellent example of this kind of collaboration. The perspectives shared today give an excellent indication of the range of stakeholders and considerations that must be included in the development of any serious framework for internet resilience. So if we accept the importance of internet resilience, and if we accept the importance of taking a whole sector ecosystem approach, then there are several steps that must be taken if we have to actually operationalize a plan. First, there needs to be a thorough assessment of the internet ecosystem within our region. This assessment should identify economic and social value propositions for the internet and juxtapose them against the technical strengths, potential vulnerabilities, and risks. Second, we need to develop a plan of action that addresses the identified vulnerabilities and risks. This plan should include specific measures for improving the resilience of the internet ecosystem, such as increasing the use of autonomous networks, increasing local internet traffic exchange, developing redundant infrastructure, improving network monitoring and alert systems, and developing and implementing effective disaster recovery plans and incident response capacity. Third, as we consider these points for implementing a regional internet resilience framework, we need to design and implement mechanisms to continuously monitor resilience. This means putting in place the necessary policies and regulations, as well as providing the necessary resources and support. Now, this is a summary presentation, so I can't get into great detail on these points, but I do hope you're taking note of them. We have to ensure that there is a thorough assessment of the internet ecosystem. We have to develop an action plan that looks at specific vulnerabilities and risks, areas for investment, areas for development. And we have to design mechanisms to continuously monitor resilience. Now, with these components in place, our last step is we need to act. We don't have time today to go into the politics of implementing regional initiatives, but suffice it to say that success of any regional framework, and specifically a regional framework for internet resilience, will require unprecedented levels of collaboration, coordination, and commitment to work together to address our common challenges and to seize our common opportunities. I, for one, believe that this is both imperative and achievable. After all, internet resilience is an issue that affects us all. By taking an ecosystem perspective and by developing regional approaches, we can ensure the reliability, the openness, and the security of the internet within our region. I encourage you all to take actions in promoting this type of common regional approach to internet resilience. And I also encourage you all to continue working together to build a more resilient internet for all. Thank you.
Thank you as always, Bevil. Assessment of vulnerabilities and risks, action plan to address, continuous monitoring mechanisms, act, focus, funded action, collaboration, coordination, commitment, harmonization under the primary stewardship of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union. Yes, indeed. What we have had the pleasure of participating in this morning is the perspectives from various actors across the ecosystem, wrapped up in the ecosystem perspective on a regional framework for internet resilience. I believe, and so does Bevil, that we have all the bits and pieces that we need to pull this off. I'm afraid we only have a few more minutes for our session today, so we are going to take a few questions. Yes, Albert?
Thank you very much, Kim. Just quickly, not a question, but a comment. I particularly liked Brent's presentation and Dr. Hosein's presentation on DNS resilience. What I wanted to say is, in respect of the Secretary General of CTU's comments on resources from international organizations, ICANN, the organization that I work with, is an international organization, and one of the best ways that we in the Caribbean can perhaps get opportunities for access to resources from these types of organizations is by participating in what happens. We have to be at the table, we have to be there to give our views and say what is important to us and present projects and programs that would be of value to us. So I encourage everyone on this call today from the Caribbean, to take advantage of these opportunities, attend the meetings. I am now going to put in the chat a link to an upcoming ICANN meeting, which incidentally is taking place in our region, the Caribbean, as part of Latin America and the Caribbean. And I really urge you, if you can't attend in person, follow remotely so that you understand what's going on and what the opportunities are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Albert. Yes, participation, attendance at meetings, and contributions in many ways. Do we have any other questions? The chat was alive with many bits and pieces. While we wait for any more oral questions to come in. Brent and yes?
I can't find my hand raised, sorry.
Okay, you go ahead, Tracy.
Sorry, I have a very, I hope it's not going to detour you too much, but what about Starlink? How can that play a role in Starlink and other LEOs, and what exactly is happening with that in Trinidad and Tobago?
Excellent. Let me hand that over to Kurleigh, if Kurleigh would not mind responding. Starlink, its role and status in Trinidad and Tobago. Kurleigh?
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Dr. Mallalieu. Yeah, Tracy, so I think in my presentation, I would have talked about one of the things I would have mentioned, one of the topics I covered would have been on, diversifying critical infrastructure, right? And I would have spoken about, and also sustainable, licensing sustainable competition. Those would have been the two factors I think I would have touched on, which would kind of speak to where your question is coming from. So on this licensing of sustainable competition, we talked about the regulator's role in accommodating, encouraging, incentivizing, and authorizing. And when we authorize, we don't just authorize, carte blanche, in other words, without a proper review, and sometimes even going back to the prospective entrant to say, hey, we like your proposition, but there are things that we need to address to operate in our jurisdiction, right? So, there's a bit of a consumer protection, promoting consumer interest, promoting interest in the public as well when we're authorizing these agencies. So as you know, Starlink, for the benefit of all on the call, is a satellite-based system. It's low Earth orbit technology. So it's basically these satellites, it's a full constellation. I believe the last count was over 2,000 satellites deployed to form the constellation. They pretty much have near global coverage, and additional satellites is really to support capacity at this stage. So they're really launching more satellites. So as customers come on and the traffic on the network grows, they need more satellite nodes to facilitate the increase in traffic to maintain an acceptable level of service, coming back to the theme of resilience. Yeah. So in that regard, they play a critical role because as they're satellite driven, they're not reliant on a lot of the terrestrial infrastructure that a lot of our terrestrial networks are. So for example, as you know, Tracy, Trinidad has experienced, once or twice a year, these electrical blackouts, these national blackouts, where, all of the networks that are, reliant on power, yes, they may have standby power systems, but some of the standby systems, especially in certain mobile networks across the country, they may only have a lifetime. They may be on batteries, and the batteries may last 3-4 hours. They may have generators, but the generators wouldn't be universal. They wouldn't have generators at every single cell site across the country. So what Starlink, a system like Starlink and other type satellite-based systems, they're immune to that terrestrial, what's happening on the terrestrial level, you know? If a hurricane passes in your country and it tears down cables and that sort of stuff, they wouldn't be impacted. So as long as you, the end user, whether you're a home user with solar panels or an institution with your generator bank, you know, as long as you can restore power and you know, secure your equipment during that crisis, you know, that satellite-based system is still available for you to connect to, you know? So once you secured your terminal, your satellite terminal, during the crisis, and you restore, you know, your source of power, your local source of power at home, you could now reestablish communications to a satellite-driven system. So we believe it's a critical part of our ecosystem, you know, going back to that term, of the ecosystem of telecom networks and systems that will improve the network resilience here in Trinidad and Tobago. In terms of the status of Starlink, we would have published that we received an application for a concession. I would have used that term in my presentation. The concession is our reference to an authorization or a license here in Trinidad. So we would have received that application for the concession in around July, August of 2022. So once we received that, we required under law to publish that. So that would have been published, inviting comments from the public, which we would have gotten comments from. We would have reviewed the application. We would have, as I sort of mentioned earlier, if we saw there are certain things that needed to be addressed in its proposal, we would have gone back to them to ensure we would have, you know, gotten levels of comfort around that. And what I can advise is at the end of last year, or before the end of last year, we would have completed our evaluation. We would have submitted our recommendation to the Minister of Digital Transformation. And now we're in that final step of the concession approval process, where the Minister of Digital Transformation would review. And he has, within the law, he has a period upon which he would either accept the recommendation, or if he chooses, he could reject the recommendation with reasons in writing. So we're in that phase now. We hope to get feedback from the Minister of Digital Transformation in due course. And I mean, if it is considered favorably, we can, you know, hopefully see that option being available to our consumers here in Trinidad and Tobago in the early part of 2023. I hope that answers the question, Tracy.
So do I, Kurleigh. And Tracy. So no more oral questions. I'm seeing no hands up now. I know we are pressured for time. There are a number of questions in the chat, many of which have been responded to in the chat. Let me pick up on a couple that have a intersecting theme. Rodney had there was forgive me, a contribution. My layman question would be, as it applies to banks, if the central bank digital currency is globally embraced, what conversations need to occur behind the scenes for local exchanges? That was one contribution in the chat. And another related was, how do we convince, Tracy asked, how do we convince these organizations to pair at the local IXP? I'd like to invite anyone at this point, Rodney, perhaps, in terms of the conversations that need to be brokered, Brent, perhaps at the convincing these organizations to pair. Let's have a quick round of responses on this. How do we get that level of engagement and action? Rodney and Brent?
Sure, thank you, Kim. So we facilitate discussions all the time with various stakeholders, and as we mentioned, and I think Brent certainly spoke about the IXP ecosystem. And so certainly any player providing critical services can be a part of the IXP. We have successfully facilitated discussions at the regional level, in particular around reduction of roaming charges, for example. And that is a good model that we can use in terms of our collaboration and facilitation of various stakeholders. And I'm happy to say, just as a side note, that those packages have been successfully implemented, and there's a lot of information on the respective service providers, the operators within the region on those new roaming arrangements. Of course, the roaming itself was intended to facilitate the free movement of data packages throughout the region, in itself facilitating as a part of the resilience, because you're able to move and access services from anywhere at reasonable, predictable costs, and so avoiding bill shock. So using that model, we certainly are happy to facilitate further discussions. We are moving beyond that, the Declaration of St. George's, which spoke about roaming, and we are facilitating discussions between the operators in the region and the big tech companies and over-the-top service providers, OTTs, that are impacting, in fact, these very networks are here in the region, and that is the next step. We're convening that meeting next month to have a discussion about how they can work together to impact the further development of the regional ICT infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the work of the CTU, Rodney. Brent, perhaps you can answer in one sentence or less. How do we convince these various organizations to pair at the local IXP?
Great, I'll be happy to. In one sentence, what I would say is that we do have evidence and data that shows the benefit it has made to a lot of non-ISP type entities. So we'll be happy to share that data once we're given the correct permissions, and we can use that as a means of convincing them to, start pairing.
Superb, and there are many channels and platforms for that sharing. I wish we had more time, but we don't. There was one technical question from Albert. Brent's final slide made a passing reference to IPv6. How critical to Caribbean resilience is IPv6 capability at this time? Does the number of ASNs have anything to do with this? I'm going to come back to you, Brent, and ask if you can do another one-sentence response to this, please.
Yes, IPv6 is really critical, especially when it comes to hosting global CDNs, because today, because of the efficiency of IPv6, their preference is to connect their caches and their caching servers with v6. So if you want to host those CDNs, you definitely have to have v6 readiness.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Brent. And you see, it's all a tapestry of agents that actually get the message out there. So just before we wrap today, I'd like to ask each of the panelists who has connectivity today with us a final question. And that is, what other recommendations, because I know we have rushed you and there's so much more that each of you can contribute. So I'd just like to give you each an opportunity to share with us very briefly, what other recommendations do you have to bolster internet resilience in the Caribbean? Let's start where we left off. So we'll start with Bevil if he's online and with adequate connectivity. Bevil, if not, we will go to Rodney, and Bevil can come in if he has connectivity.
I have connectivity, and I'm going to try my video on as well.
Thank you, Bevil.
All right, tell me if you can see me. Good morning, everyone.
Yep.
And thanks again for the opportunity to share this. I think this has been a very, very useful panel discussion, given the context that we're in. My comment would actually be around the issue of coordination and collaboration. The CTU has been doing an incredible job in raising the energy levels around the region as it relates to commonly considering some of the critical issues around resilience. And I think it's a job that they spearhead well, but they can't do it alone. And so the other organizations, the other institutions, and the other governments across the region need to really get on board this common conversation. As I said in my presentation, the time now is to act. Resilience is important. Internet is important. Connectivity is important. But we still lack some fundamental metrics for determining just how important it is. And so as a first measure, efforts to assess, to measure, to survey the regional landscape, I think would be critical to making the next best, most informed decisions. So I just want to put that on the table as one of the foundational next steps for all of the activities that we have discussed today.
Thank you. Collaboration, coordination, action. Thank you, Bevil. Rodney? Closing remarks.
Yes, thank you very much again for the opportunity. And I will say on a great day, on a wonderful, perfect day, nobody really thinks about internet resilience. Everything works, what are we talking about? So, but the problem is every day is not the perfect day. We are living in a region that is vulnerable to disasters, in particular hurricanes. We have volcanic activity in some of our islands. And so it's important that from the infrastructure perspective, I would say that we also consider the hardening of the infrastructure, in particular terrestrial fiber systems. We can certainly consider it's costly, but we have to consider placing those cables underground as far as possible because, overhead cables are particularly susceptible to damage in hurricanes. And therefore, the hardening of that infrastructure by placing it underground is going to be very important and certainly a long-term option. There are other mechanisms globally, like the Tampere Convention. I'd love to see our member states sign on to that. Again, on a wonderful day, fine, in the event of a disaster where everything is flattened. Hopefully there are the LEO satellites there to provide additional capacity. But the ability to bring equipment in quickly, effectively, efficiently to stand up critical services to be able to provide internet access, because internet access itself will be a critical part of recovery and reporting on, on where things are most are badly damaged and so on. So internet being able to stand up in a quick and efficient manner after disaster is going to be important. So those two things I'll leave there, and perhaps hopefully can be on the agenda for the Caribbean Internet Resilience Task Force. Thank you.
Superb, Rodney. Patrick, if you have connectivity, please do offer some final words. So if Patrick is not able to connect adequately, Brent, some final brief words?
Thank you. So I think our approach should be one where we have a more improved strategic focus on the human aspect. As we see deploying internet exchanges in its technical sense, it's not that difficult. We have done it in the English-speaking Caribbean, the Dutch-speaking Caribbean, the French-speaking Caribbean. The challenge is sometimes getting persons to be convinced that they need to connect an IXP. And I think that's where the focus should be as well, because it's a critical part for resilience. As we see, we have one IXP to date that is built to world standards. It has critical infrastructure, but it has no peers. Why? Because the potential members think there are no benefits to them. So I think, as we collaborate, as Bevil mentioned, we need to get that message across to them. So I want to see a focus more on convincing, on the human side, to let's get it done.
And it's more than preaching to the converted. It is Correct. Reaching the unconverted. Thank you, Brent. Yes, Kurleigh.
Hi, yeah. One of the things I think, building on Rodney's point about when everything is working, no one thinks about internet resilience. When everything is working is the best time to test your internet resilience. So one of the things I would like us to see from a proactive basis is that we plan the testing of our internet resilience. So, the operators, the network operators, interested stakeholders like regulators and so on, we're able to coordinate in the various countries once a year. And again, it could fall under the auspices of the Caribbean Internet Resilience Task Force. Once a year, we coordinate a simulation of a disaster, right? Of an outage, of a crisis. And of course, every year you can simulate a different crisis. One could be hurricane driven, one could be a cybersecurity attack, one could be electrical blackout, whatever is the case. But every year you do a simulation of if this were to occur, what happens? And then we test, we see what services work, what services don't work. Perhaps DNS, perhaps it could be current DNS infrastructure, because DNS has already some memory, some caching involved in it already. So we could test to see how long that's going to hold out before we need something separate to come in, where there are gaps. Are there a particular application like a WhatsApp or a Zoom, where even though you have the IXP and the users could connect to each other, we don't have the application locally hosted in your market to facilitate the connection of each other, So we simulate these crises, we simulate these outages. We collect some data, we identify some gaps, and we work proactively for the rest of the year on plugging those gaps. So that is something I think we can, as a region, pick up on to improve our resilience moving forward.
I love it, and I'm fully on board. Thank you, Kurleigh. Kevin, the last word.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, and thank you very much for having me today. I think it was a very engaging session. So I think my final thoughts, just to echo the comments of Brent, from our experience in Africa, the country with the highest resilience score, Internet Resilience Index score, is the country with the most internet exchange points, or IXPs. So IXPs are a key pillar for internet resiliency. The more participants in an IXP make the resilience much better in the country. So that's one key infrastructure which internet service providers in the Caribbean region or in any country should connect to. Resiliency is all about redundancy and backup. So more infrastructure by the internet service providers will significantly improve the resiliency in a country. So even if the current ISPs, we've seen it a bit in the measurements we've carried in Africa, the countries that the ISPs have increased maybe cross-border connections or number of internet exchange points, or have deployed more telecom infrastructure, those have significantly improved the resilience. So I think that's the key thing, more backup, more infrastructure. There was a very good question about low Earth orbit satellites. What are they going to do? I think that's going to be one key factor in improving resiliency, because it'll mean, should something happen to the terrestrial infrastructure, there is a satellite option that will keep the connectivity going. And the same for internet services like DNS, email, and so on. More the better for resiliency, because it means should something go down, there will be an option for keeping the service going. And that's what resiliency is about, keeping services going in the event of faults. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Redundancy not only in hardware, but in software, in systems, in processes, in human resources, logically and physically. So yes, yes. Thank you, panelists. Let's keep in touch. Let's all ensure organizational coverage at meetings, as well as into artifacts, contributing in the many ways within our spheres of capability and influence. At this time, we hand over to Caribnog, the CIGF, and the much anticipated Caribbean Internet Resilience Task Force, CIRTF, to pick up from here. Thank you, TTIGF, for the opportunity to engage with a powerhouse of agents in the Internet resilience ecosystem. I am pleased and proud to hand back to you, Chair, exactly on our targeted time, 10 a.m. Thank you all.
Wow, this was certainly a most impactful presentation. Thank you so much, Kim, for expertly not only making up for 6 minutes, but guiding the deliberations here this morning. And what an amazing panel we had with diverse views. All, it was like I tried to get the analogy with this very impactful panel. All I could say, it was maybe a 7-point star. Everybody was really right on point and really addressed the issue of internet resilience.